Israel has killed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Lebanese political movement Hezbollah. This is a massive escalation of Israel's war on Lebanon. So Israel is expanding its war on Gaza into Lebanon and other countries, and the United States is staunchly supporting it. What is Israel's goal? Well, the Israeli media is not hiding it. The major Israeli newspaper, the Jerusalem Post, published an article arguing that Lebanon should be part of Israel, arguing that Israel supposedly has the right to colonize Lebanese territory. And Israel's far-right Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu used a map when he spoke at the United Nations that erased the existence of Palestine, erased the occupied West Bank, and erased Gaza, and claimed all of that as part of Israel. So they're not hiding the fact that their goal is to colonize Palestine, to colonize Lebanon, to expand their colonial project. And I should point out that they are being condemned by the world. So when Netanyahu spoke at the United Nations, as he was introduced, there was a massive walkout with many diplomats from around the world protesting, leaving the United Nations to condemn Netanyahu and the genocide that he has carried out in Gaza and now this war of aggression against Lebanon. Now, the U.S. government is praising Israel and strongly supporting it and sending it billions of dollars of weapons. And Washington claims that Hezbollah is a so-called terrorist organization. Now, it must be emphasized that the vast majority of countries on earth do not recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. It is really only the United States and its proxies and puppets in the world that claim Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. And I should emphasize that Hezbollah as a political movement has both a political party and an armed wing. And the political party Hezbollah is a member of Lebanon's democratically elected parliament. They have elected representatives in the Lebanese government. And Lebanon is a very religiously diverse country, and Hezbollah has in fact been allied with many Christian groups in Lebanon. This is an article in Newsweek noting that Nasrallah's death was mourned by many Lebanese Christian leaders. The leader of the Lebanese Christian political party, Marada, praised Nasrallah after his death, and he wrote, quote, "The symbol is gone, the legend is born, and the resistance continues," end quote. This is one of the Christian political parties that was allied with Hezbollah. The former president of Lebanon, Michel Aoun, who is also a Christian, praised Nasrallah as well. And after Israel killed Nasrallah, the former Lebanese president wrote, quote, "Lebanon loses a distinguished and honest leader who led the national resistance on the paths of victory and liberation. He was faithful to his promise and loyal to his people who reciprocated his love, trust, and commitment," end quote. Again, this is the former president of Lebanon, a Christian, praising the Hezbollah leader who was killed by Israel. Now, if you listen to the propaganda from the US government, you would be confused about this because Washington absurdly portrays Hezbollah as a so-called terrorist organization, not mentioning that Hezbollah played a lead role in defeating ISIS and Al-Qaeda, in fighting against actual terrorist organizations. Because Hezbollah is a Shia political organization. It follows the Shia branch of Islam, and it is seen by Sunni extremists to be non-Muslim apostates. And Shia Muslims tend to be the main victims of far-right extremist groups, which are Sunni fundamentalists, Salafi jihadist groups. And that's why in Lebanon, Hezbollah has been allied with Christian groups against the extremist Salafi jihadist fascist groups that have tried to commit genocide not only against Shia Muslims, but also against Christians. Meanwhile, these extremist Salafi jihadist groups have gotten support from the US and Israel. CNN reported that ISIS was using US weapons. The Israeli newspaper Jerusalem Post reported that Israel had been treating al-Qaeda fascists who were fighting in Syria in Israeli hospitals. Israel was supporting them in their fight against the Syrian government, against Hezbollah, and against Iran. So Israel was literally allied with al-Qaeda. The US was also allied with al-Qaeda in Syria. And it's not just me saying this. This was admitted by the current US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Sullivan had been a longtime assistant to Hillary Clinton. And in 2012, Jake Sullivan wrote an email to Hillary Clinton. And we have this document because it was declassified from the State Department and published by WikiLeaks back when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And in 2012, Jake Sullivan published an email to Hillary Clinton in which he said, quote, AQ is on our side in Syria, end quote. AQ is al-Qaeda. So literally, the current US National Security Advisor admitted that al-Qaeda was allied with the United States in the Syrian war against the Syrian government and against Hezbollah, which was allied with the Syrian government, and also against Iran, which supported both Hezbollah and the Syrian government. The US was allied with al-Qaeda. Israel was allied with al-Qaeda. This is blatant. You don't need to dig that far. It was admitted by top US officials. But the US government and propaganda outlets want us to believe that Hezbollah, which defeated ISIS and al-Qaeda in alliance with Christians, is a so-called terrorist organization, whereas the US and Israel were literally allied with the terrorists. But the US government wants people to be ignorant about groups like Hezbollah. Just like how in the lead up to the illegal US invasion of Iraq, the CIA and US officials spread lies trying to link Iraq's leader Saddam Hussein to al-Qaeda, despite the fact that they were enemies. They were complete enemies fighting each other, but the US wanted to link them together to justify invading Iraq. Similarly, US officials have absurdly called Hezbollah a terrorist organization and tried to link it to al-Qaeda, which is the enemy of Hezbollah. In fact, it's worth going way back to 2006 and looking at an article that was published in the Washington Post that actually interviewed Nasrallah, the former leader of Hezbollah. And in this article, you can see how he actually thinks in his own words. The Washington Post referred to Nasrallah as a cross between Iran's revolutionary leader Ayatollah Khomeini and the Argentine revolutionary Che Guevara, a mix between the Iranian Revolution and the Cuban Revolution. And the Washington Post referred to Nasrallah as an Islamic populist as well as a charismatic guerrilla tactician. And that's, I think, an accurate description. He was a guerrilla leader, and Hezbollah had its origins in fighting Israel's illegal occupation of South Lebanon. And in this interview, the Washington Post asked Nasrallah about al-Qaeda, which of course is the enemy of Hezbollah. And in response to these questions about the 9/11 attacks, Nasrallah condemned the September 11th attacks. And Nasrallah said, quote, "What do the people who worked in those two World Trade Center towers, along with thousands of employees, women and men, have to do with the war that is taking place in the Middle East, or the war that Mr. George Bush may wage on people in the Islamic world? Therefore, we condemned this act, and any similar act we condemn," end quote. So Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, was condemning al-Qaeda for attacking civilians because Hezbollah, despite US government propaganda, Hezbollah does not target civilians. It is a nationalist organization that has defended the sovereignty of Lebanon against Israeli colonialism, and yes, has carried out attacks against the Israeli military and Israeli targets and the US military, but it does not intentionally target civilians, unlike these fascist terrorist groups like al-Qaeda, which do target civilians. And furthermore, you can see this distinction in this interview that Nasrallah did with the Washington Post. He said, quote, "I said nothing about the Pentagon, meaning we remained silent. We neither favored nor opposed the act," end quote. So he's saying, look, we're not against targeting the US military, but we are against targeting civilians. And then Nasrallah said, quote, "The method of Osama bin Laden and the fashion of bin Laden, we do not endorse them, and many of the operations that they have carried out, we condemned them very clearly," end quote. So again, Hezbollah is an enemy of Al-Qaeda and condemned Al-Qaeda not only for its extremist fascist ideology, but also for attacking civilians. And by the way, let's not forget that just as the US and Israel were allied with Al-Qaeda in Syria, historically, the US had been one of the biggest supporters of Osama bin Laden. And before the 9/11 attacks, the Western media praised Osama bin Laden, as the British newspaper The Independent put it, quote, "an anti-Soviet warrior," because the US saw Al-Qaeda and bin Laden as allies in the fight against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. That's where Al-Qaeda emerged, out of the CIA operation, which was called Operation Cyclone, in which the CIA spent billions of dollars arming and training fascists to fight against the Soviets and the Afghan socialist government. And this led to the creation of Al-Qaeda and the creation of the Taliban. So Al-Qaeda emerges out of the history of US imperialism, and Hezbollah emerges as a resistance group against Israeli colonialism and US imperialism, fighting against Western imperialism and also fighting against Al-Qaeda, which again, so Al-Qaeda comes from imperialism, emerges out of imperialism, and Hezbollah, it was created to fight imperialism. They're literally the opposite. Now, another propaganda talking point that the US claims about Hezbollah is that it's supposedly anti-Semitic, which is not true. Hezbollah has in fact collaborated with anti-Zionist Jews and said our problem is not with Judaism, our problem is with Zionism, a colonialist political movement. This was even admitted by the neoconservative pro-Israel group MEMRI, MEMRI, and back in 2005, they published a report that was detailing a meeting that was held in Beirut in Lebanon that brought together anti-Zionist rabbis and Hezbollah and Hamas at a pro-Palestinian convention. And in this conference, one of the members of parliament from Hezbollah, again, which is a political party in addition to an armed group, Abdullah Qusair, this is Lebanese member of parliament from the Hezbollah political party, he said, quote, "Hezbollah has never been against religions. Hezbollah supports all religions. It supports interfaith dialogue, and it has no problem with any religion. Hezbollah considers Zionism to be the enemy, not the Jews as a people or a religion," end quote. Judaism and Zionism are not the same. They're completely different. Judaism is a religion. Zionism is a political movement, a colonialist movement. The founding father of the Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl, admitted in a letter to the British colonialist, genocidal colonizer of Africa, Cecil Rhodes, Herzl admitted that Zionism is a colonialist movement that is inspired by European colonialist movements. And they wanted to colonize Palestine and had the support of the British Empire, which in 1917 gave its green light to the creation of Israel with the Balfour Declaration. Zionism is a European colonialist political movement that is not the same as Judaism. They're completely different. And there are many Jews around the world who are anti-Zionist, and Hezbollah has supported anti-Zionist Jews in their common struggle against Zionist colonialism. So the US-Israeli propaganda narrative claiming that Hezbollah is a so-called terrorist organization and is supposedly anti-Semitic, it's completely false. It's absurd. Hezbollah fought against ISIS and Al-Qaeda in alliance with Christians, defending Christians in Lebanon, and Hezbollah itself originates in the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. That's where it comes from. In 1982, Israel invaded South Lebanon, and in 1985, it officially began a military occupation. There's a report I'm reading here from the Los Angeles Times titled, "Israel Leaves South Lebanon After 22 Years." This article was published in 2000. The Los Angeles Times pointed out that Israel actually began launching attacks inside Lebanese territory in 1978, carrying out attacks on Palestinians. And then in 1982, Israel launched a full-scale invasion of Lebanon, which escalated into an Israeli occupation of South Lebanon in 1985. That occupation continued for 15 years until 2000, when Israel was forced out by the Lebanese resistance forces, which were led by Hezbollah. Hezbollah was formed in response to the Israeli military occupation as an indigenous resistance organization based on an ideology of Shia Islam, but it is a kind of nationalist liberation theology ideology. And yes, it is true that Hezbollah has received support from Iran, but Hezbollah is not an Iranian proxy. It is not Iranian. They are indigenous Lebanese who are resistance fighters who took up arms to fight against the Israeli occupiers backed by the US, who were illegally occupying their land, killing their family members, and they successfully expelled the Israeli occupiers after 15 years of armed struggle. And then, after Israel was expelled, Israel attacked Lebanon yet again in 2006, waging another brutal war, killing and injuring thousands of people in Lebanon. So Hezbollah is an organization that has defended the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Lebanon as a country. Now, the last thing I want to say here before I conclude is that Israel thinks it can simply defeat Hezbollah or Hamas or other groups by assassinating their leaders. But these are resistance movements that have their origins in the indigenous struggle against Israeli colonialism and US imperialism. And we've seen this history happen again and again. In fact, in 1992, Israel assassinated the previous leader of Hezbollah, Abbas al-Musawi, and the Israeli media at the time claimed that the era of conflict with Hezbollah in its comfortable playground has ended. But what happened? Another leader emerged, Nasrallah, and Hezbollah became stronger than ever. So now Israel is gloating, saying, we killed Nasrallah, Hezbollah is defeated. But they refuse to see, because of their colonial arrogance, they refuse to see that the resistance will continue as long as Israel keeps militarily occupying Lebanese territory, Palestinian territory, Syrian territory in the Golan Heights, as long as Israel keeps colonizing land belonging to these people, these indigenous peoples who will fight for their family, for their friends. They will not be colonized. They will not sit down and allow Israel to kill their friends and family, to take their lands, to destroy their homes. So every few years, Israel, with US support, assassinates Palestinian leaders. They assassinate Lebanese leaders. They assassinate Syrian and Iraqi leaders and Yemeni leaders. And what happens? New ones emerge because these are political movements. So as long as these Israeli colonialist policies continue, as long as US imperialism continues to oppress the people of the region and the people of the world, there will always be resistance against that. It's inevitable. They do go in ebbs and flows. There's a cycle, moments of peaks and moments of troughs, but it will continue. And the Western media will continue to spread propaganda and disinformation and fake news to confuse their people so they don't understand what's actually going on in these conflicts, to manufacture consent for US-Israeli colonialism and aggression. But that's why it's important to have alternative media outlets. That's why I founded Geopolitical Economy Report, to help educate and inform people. And on that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton, the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share this, and I will see you all soon.